Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is Hacking P-Values and Causal Inference, a little bit of casual talk. So today we're joined by Dr. Adan Becerra from Rush University. And we're also going to have a panel of other entrepreneurs from Haiti's tech scene join us at the end of the call so we can talk about different aspects of statistics and data as it relates to Haiti and the global South in general. But just to give you guys a little bit of explanation about our background as IT Analytics, we are the ones that are hosting this webinar. So IT Analytics is a data lab that's headquartered in Port-au-Prince. We are working to elevate the analytical capacity in Haiti, but just generally across the world. And so we want to use emerging technologies to open up new opportunities for people and try to reduce some of the socioeconomic disparities that we've seen in recent years as technology has been consolidated in few economies and few groups of people. So we hope to have this be the start of a series of many other insightful conversations that will be happening about these new technologies and about these new ideas. And we hope to encourage other questions that come in from our participants to continue discussing these ideas. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Becerra, Adan. And please, as you guys have questions, please put them in the chat and I'll try to bubble them up towards the end of the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan. And yeah, I just want to give a special shout out to Castelline as well and Ayiti Analytics for organizing the webinar. So, I figured instead of keeping, being very formal, I figured I do have a couple slides, but like as Morgan said, we can certainly chat afterwards. And most of the slides are they're memes. There's nothing like anything crazy or formal. It's just something I think that can help us guide like the conversation. So I think I can share my screen. Let's do this. All right, can everyone see you can see my screen, right, Morgan?
Yes, sir.
Cool. So I just wanted to, before we get like show anything, I wanted to say that like the essence of this talk really is one of the oldest problems really, which is, how do humans make sense of data and knowledge and given so much uncertainty and randomness in the data. And it's certainly something that I think applies to everyone because, when I say data, it's not just data in a spreadsheet. I mean, it can be data in a spreadsheet, but it's really, what are the possibilities that we can achieve with data and what are the limitations? So I wanted to start off by saying this talk is about p-value hacking. So before we understand p-value hacking, I just wanted to, so that we all on the same page, like really give a brief summary on like what the p-value is, what is this p-value, why is it important, like or what should not be important. So as many of you know, whenever a researcher does a scientific study or they want to do some kind of statistical analysis, in order for them to get the paper published, or in order for them to show that they've found something important, they have to show what's called statistical significance, right? And that is based on this calculation of a p-value, which has to be less than 0.05. And so if it's 0.05, you basically conclude that you have found a statistically significant effect. And if it isn't less than 0.05, then you basically haven't found anything that's significant. So, basically you want to get that p-value less than 0.05 and you're super excited when it's less than 0.05. And this is what in any paper that you see published in the literature, what you will see a researcher do, they will do some kind of study and then ultimately they'll have a p-value. And that's what really is, I'd say, what makes the study truthful or not truthful. And so like a perfect example, it sort of applies to all of us right now. Sorry, Mormons. So can people see the title? No.
More or less. It's cut off in the top half.
Yeah, because I can't. Yeah, there we go. So this is a study on this drug remdesivir for COVID, right? And I just wanted to show that, like, here in the abstract, what they're showing, who cares about all these numbers, but there's a p-value here. And basically, there's a culture in like science and statistics for us to really want to calculate something and to have that p-value be less than 0.05. But it's, as you've kind of seen, it's a little bit arbitrary that we've chosen as 0.05. But this, I just wanted to kind of note that this is like a real life thing that happens. These are all the NIH study group members who did this study. And so, like, what should we believe? What should we not believe, right? And so we're supposed to believe studies that have p-values less than 0.05, but as I'll talk about right now, there's some limitations with that. So here's more memes, right? If your study is p-value less than, greater than 0.05, game over. You basically haven't done anything. So you're saying there's a chance, right? So yeah, so say you do a study and your p-value is 0.15, and you're like, damn, I wish it was 0.05, right? So you're naturally going to be inclined to do other things that you might not even be aware of, to like rerun the thing or rerun the calculation the way so that eventually you get that p-value less than 0.05, right? So yes, the main issue here is that most people think that the word p-value is the probability of something being true, but it's actually not that. It has an incredibly technical statistical definition that I'm not going to get into. That's grossly misinterpreted, and it's basically like at the root of how we as scientists or researchers or data geeks or whatever you want to call us, like, it's at the root of us saying whether we found something important or we haven't. And it's really based on this like kind of dodgy, arbitrary, dichotomous way of doing things that can get you into trouble. And so, it can get you into trouble because, like, if you're a researcher and all you want to do is like get that, come on, like you have to, like, you're obsessed with this p-value thing. And this is really the culture of academics right now. And really has been for a long time. And so that's really what the p-value is. I wanted to summarize it because I figured there'd be folks that, from different backgrounds, but also to see, whenever you're doing data, there's, as I mentioned, there's the inherent problem is like, well, how do we make sense of, like, how much can we really say from a study we did? Like, how can we really say that masks protect you from COVID? Can we really say that, locking down the entire country is going to be good, right? It's an inherently statistical question, because no matter what we do, we're never going to be able to truly prove it. We have to have some kind of like numerical, like way of like making sense of the data. So anyways, that's the background. And so, lots of people have published on this issue of p-hacking, and it's basically, this bad feature that is inherent in research where you're doing things like you do a study, if it's not, if you don't show that the p-value is 0.05, even before you publish it, you might like recode a variable a different way, or you might like exclude some patients because whatever. And then a lot of the time it's like the p-value is at the cutoff, like it's like 0.06 and 0.07. And you're like, oh, what can I do to just get it across the line? And it just incentivizes really bad research. It really just, it loses the creativity. Like Morgan and I were talking right before the webinar. We can continue this afterwards. But the idea that, like, for data science or statistics to make sense, you have to be creative with like the data, because nothing's like really black or white. And so if you kind of set this threshold of like, you have to meet these standards, like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying like, allow for researchers to publish lousy research without it being rigorous, but like the way you evaluate the evidence is not, to me, not that, and to many others, like, not that rigorous. And there's like constant research, like this is probably like why most published research findings are false. Like, the difference between significant and not significant is not statistically significant itself. Over half of cytology studies fail reproducibility. Like, this is, I'm just showing like a couple of examples. I can keep on going. What happened last year was kind of interesting. This is the last slide that I'll show. and then we can like continue the conversation and talk about other things. But last year, these three researchers and 800 other of us, I was one of the signatories, basically wrote a letter to Nature summarizing like the limitations of the framework we currently have to evaluate evidence. And it was first of its kind in a sense because, as you saw, like there was lots of buildup to this. You know, remove and redefine. There was lots of buildup, but here it was like the first time that people actually like, instead of like writing something really technical, we just like, it was more of a petition. And it's kind of you know, we made the argument that like the system we currently have is sort of, it makes it's easy and it makes sense for like the framework we have with how like journals and even companies will hire statisticians to do, you know, a number of different things, you know, whether it might be like, hey, how can I drive up my ROI, or like, how can I reduce like errors, or all these things. Ultimately, inherently involved in that, ultimately, there's a recommendation that's going to be made based on the analysis. And like, I just think that, you know, we lose the creativity and the like, the nuance in the data when you just kind of like dichotomize things. So this was kind of neat. You know, a lot of this, the p-value hacking it's been talked about in different you know realms, and there's different interpretations of it. But the real essence of it is just this idea of like incentivizing poor, like I'd say poor like data processing decisions that will give you a favorable outcome that like loses away the essence of like the initial question. So anyways, that is that's all. That's what I wanted to kind of start off with. And you know, I'm happy to talk about like there was another part of causal inference that I want to talk about that we can maybe get into a little bit later. But Morgan, look to you now to
okay. Great. Thank you, Adan. So yeah, I mean, I think that it was really interesting that you guys finally wrote that paper to tell Nature like, hey, we gotta change things up right now. And my only comment, you know, in relation to that paper, as you said, is that p-values are easy to understand once you know, figure them out. They're easy to understand. They're easy to incorporate within the current academic research structure and system that we have.
Right.
But the world is not simple and easy. It's more complicated. And just because the system works, it's easy to have p-values, doesn't justify us continuing to use it.
Right.
And we have more complicated techniques than we did back in the day when we were just using p-values. We can do much more complicated analyses than we previously had in our wheelhouse at all. So with that said, I'm going to invite Chris Genti to be joining us today. And so I'll introduce Chris. Chris is a tech serial entrepreneur, Asian American. And so currently he's working as a curriculum engineer with data analytics and data science at Hacker USA. But he's got 8 years of experience in data analytics, BI, and data science, and he's generally a data geek. He got his undergrad in economics and international affairs from University of Florida, and he got his master's degree in applied economics from Florida State University. So welcome, Chris, and I'll see if you have any comments or questions to jump in here and add as well.
Show us your background, Chris.
Yeah.
If you're still there.
Yeah. Hopefully we didn't lose him to his signal. But while we wait for Chris to jump back on with all of us, the question that, you know, I really kind of wanted to talk about was like, what can we definitively say about the world with data? And so this is like where you were, I think you stopped short of talking about like the, you know, traditional between frequentists and Bayesians in terms of statistics, and, you know, different approaches to that. Potentially you could talk a little bit more about causal inference and how that kind of relates.
Sure, yeah. And I actually had one last slide that I'll just to answer that question on Bayesian versus not. So there's this really famous philosopher. I think she's famous. She's cool. Uh, Deborah Mayo, and she wrote this really good book. She like literally she's like philosopher of statistics. And so yeah, I didn't get into it. So when I was mentioning that the p-value like sort of is like makes sense, it's like easy, it's easy to integrate in the academic system. It has done that in the past 5 to 6 decades by a group of what we now call, they're called frequentists. And there's like basically a camp. There's two basically main camps in statistics. You're either a frequentist or a Bayesian, and frequent, and like it actually ends up being a lot more complex than that. But for the sake of this conversation, there's basically two main camps, and like frequentists use p-values and Bayesians use other tools to basically be able to say like you mentioned, like what can we definitely say about data, and basically her book that she wrote, she calls it the statistics wars, the wars between Bayesians versus frequentists, and the fundamental philosophical difference is like how they think about probability. So frequentists tend to think probability is sort of objective, like they view the world as a little bit more objective, versus Bayesians tend to feel that the world is a little bit more subjective, and we sort of keep on learning and updating our. The New York Times actually just wrote a nice piece on Bayesian ways of thinking. And so, yeah, what can we definitely say about data? I guess that's a hard question for sure. We can make a lot of times, like we can say a lot about things about data, but like how does it generalize to other settings is like a whole other thing. So the way I view it is, I don't think we can necessarily prove much of anything with data unless you replicate it often in different settings. And so you can show in one study that this drug for COVID prevents mortality in one population, but you might show that it's different in the other population. And so that, you know, and once again, and it largely depends on the question and like how much evidence there is and like how big the difference is and whatnot. But maybe Chris, like who's back on with his cool background, can jump in.
Hey guys, sorry about that. I didn't. I thought I was going to be on a little bit later. Sorry about that. So
No worries.
I am here. So I don't know how far along we are, but if you
yeah, no, we just got. I mean, I mostly just finished, and Morgan was just introduced you, and you know, kind of was going.
We were waiting to see your background again.
Yeah. So I just you know, well, you know, how do you use data, and what sort of what's your take on this whole p-value?
Sure. So the use of data and where we are today, I think it's a unique time. Myself, as Morgan, I'm sure introduced me as, you know, someone who's been in the business for a long time. I currently function as someone whose actually, you know, day-to-day function has to do with the prepping of minds of future professionals in the field. And so I'm very much on the pulse of what folks need, tied to the fact that very recently have I been in this role. Like literally started somewhere in March or April or something like that. So very recent. So I've always been cognizant of just how the way I like to describe it is that, you know, the new oil, the new energy that runs this world now is data. It's not oil anymore, it's data. And unlike oil, oil is losing in quantity, right? It's finite, and we're at some point we're gonna you know, it's gonna be done, right? Data is doubling every few months, you know, and tripling, quadrupling every few years, right? And so why this is important to understand is that you need, it's sort of as if you're navigating a large ocean on a little boat, and you need a captain. And that's what a data professional is. He's a captain who can navigate you from one shore to another, from Europe to North America, right? And there's lots of data, lots of space, because there's so much water and so much is growing. And a lot of folks, you know, there's a thought particularly, the big thing you hear, especially in America, is, AI is going to take jobs. Is it really? Right? Because, to get AI to get a particular place where it can even do a fraction of what a human being can, it takes a lot of freaking data, right? And as I just mentioned, that data needs a steward. And so I think you're going to see a transition, absolutely, right? That's all, from horse to vehicle, you had less people who could do horseshoes, a lot more people who could, change your oil, right? And I think same thing, you're going to see a transition from, people doing very repetitive tasks, to being someone who can do many different facets of what it takes to run data. And so, and a big part of data, ultimately, it depends on how far you want to go, but, the ones that pay the most uses statistics, right? And what our speaker brought in, understanding correlation, understanding, p-values, understanding standard deviation, right? Understanding, us if you didn't R value, R squared, stuff like that, on and on and on, right? And so it's important that, the best way to kind of understand statistics is that it's your Batman. Statistics is it's an important, crucial part of your tool belt. I'd say probably if you know Batman, his favorite thing that probably is the little batarang, and it comes back, right? And that's what statistics is. It's an important tool, but not the only tool. And certainly Batman can go episodes without ever using statistics. Using his batarang. I'm sorry, and meaning there's a lot of professionals who could go and not use statistics, but eventually you have to get in there, right? And finally, and to kind of bring it home, for me, I've enjoyed the times when I've had opportunities to actually use statistics. In fact, for the first places I've worked, I had to build a time series model that helped smooth out the forecasting model for revenue for an aerospace manufacturing company. No one asked me to do it. I just did it because I saw the way they were doing it was just inefficient. It was just some guy guessing. It was just a woman guessing. I think we're going to do this. No, let's use different factors. Let's use, what the industry is saying, the value for the market's going to be, really measuring the degree of change potentially, measuring, and then going as far as, seeing what our percentage of failure of parts, our QA brought that in, how many orders have come in, and how many are in back order, right? So using as many different metrics as I could get my hands on in that company. And then put that together and see which were statistically significant, which factors really affected the actual monthly count, right? And then taken as a whole, which ones affected the quarterly counts, both as a whole and individually. And so, I don't want to scare folks off, because when you talk about statistics, it's very much something that frightens people, right?
Yeah.
But something I like to use, and I want to quickly find it here on my computer. Here we go. I want to see if I can quickly find it here on my computer. Okay, wrong tab. Okay, here's the tab. Here it is. Right? Well, that helps. I think it's going to help. It's going to help folks put it in context.
You share your screen, right?
Nah, I got too much stuff going on here. I may get Ayiti Analytics in trouble. I share the round trade. But here it is. I already found it. Right? Which is that statistics is, when you look at the breakdown of the word, right? It really is. It's the science of dealing about data, about the state of the community that we're living in. Right, that's all it really is. Right, it's nothing more than that. And if you take it from that perspective, right, it's not as intimidating. Right?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I see it, like, I see it as like making sense of uncertainty, and so every human being makes sense of their own uncertainty, whether they like it or not. There's a formal way of doing it that we've developed tools. And one thing you mentioned, Chris, that I totally agree with, is, you know, the story and the context, because I always tell, when I'm mentoring students, I always tell them the easiest part of statistics is doing the statistics. Running the models, getting the numbers, getting the computer to spit out these like numbers, that's the easy part. The hardest part is now making sense of it and giving a recommendation and saying, yes, you should, like in my sense, I do a lot of like, yes, you should do this type of surgery versus this type of surgery, or you should deliver this type of chemotherapy versus this type of chemotherapy. Or you could, you know, people in education use it to say, you know, I want to develop this kind of system versus this kind of, right? The applications are endless. But really, you know, and there is, yes, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background to get that answer, but I can run 20 different models to you right now and give you 20 different stories. I might believe one story more than the other, and that's like where the training comes in. But ultimately, I have to be able to give you a story. I can't just give you a number in the graph. It's meaningless. The good statisticians are ones who really are in tune with what the problem is and who their audience is. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, it's certainly, you know, it's a great time. 'Cause I can tell you, you know, you know, you can be in a recession. You know, the need for what you for knowing this and being able to do everything you just said is crucial. It's not crucial, but it's a great thing to be able to do, and the longevity of it from overall career perspective. You know, you won't go wrong. You won't go wrong. And I think that's I can complete my thought with that.
So, guys, you guys both touched on two things, which I thought were kind of interesting. One is kind of like, you know, one talking about like the future of work. You know, will AI replace us? And then earlier, Don, you mentioned this idea of like it being subjective using Bayesian statistics and how that's fundamentally different from frequentist. And I just wanted to throw out here is one thing that I thought was interesting in my like philosophy research was that there's some people, some neuroscientists who believe that the human brain is just a series of Bayesian analyses. So each neuron is more or less working as a very large Bayesian network. And so Bayesian networks are one type of model that you can do if you want to apply Bayesian statistics and to get to causal inference. But they fundamentally believe that we are no different from some of these algorithms that we're developing. And so that's a clue in terms of how these algorithms are being developed, is that they're trying to mimic us. It's not that there's something superior about them. It's rather that humans have studied biology enough to see this is how it works, like in biology and chemistry, you know, at the atomic level. Like if we were to extrapolate these into numerical algorithms, right, could we do these same things at a larger scale? And that's where we get some versions of machine learning and AI. So I think that was just one interesting thing, is that how it relates to, you guys are talking about statistics being this perception of reality. Some people would argue that fundamentally all we are Bayesian networks in our head. That's all we are, is just these long chain networks. But the second thing you guys are talking about is like, will it replace humans, right? And I think you guys both agree that no, like AI is not going to replace us, but some jobs will go away. And that's become an ever more present conversation now with the latest release of GPT-3. So I kind of want to see, what are your guys' opinions on GPT-3? So this is the recent, I believe it's OpenAI deep learning network that was released. So OpenAI is a company that's co-founded by the large tech guru, and people say future to be Iron Man, Elon Musk. You know, what kinds of jobs are we going to lose from GPT-3? I mean, script writing. Could the last season of Game of Thrones been written better by an AI?
Yes.
I send you guys the question.
You want to go first, Chris?
No, you grab that. You get first crack on that. Go ahead.
You know, this is the reality. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, will it replace jobs? Yes, it already has. Will it replace all jobs? No. When will it happen? Who knows? But listen, I think there is a lot of fruitful and exciting stuff happening in that world, like machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotics. And I think we've already actually shown some pretty good success. I think there is room for there to be optimistic, because we already shown that like there is success. Like if you look at some of the best successes of machine learning, best one in my field I can think of in pathology, like a machine can diagnose a tumor better than a pathologist can. That has been shown. Now, can the machine entirely plan the whole treatment and then no, it can't. All it can do is feed it these scans from someone's lung, for example, and it will be able to be able to predict it better than, but it won't be able to, doesn't mean it will replace the pathologist's job. So it's really good at prediction. I think that in order for AI, artificial intelligence, to really take off and to be like what we all think it's going to be, it has to incorporate like a system of causality. And I know I've talked with Morgan about this in terms of like robots are really good at making associations and making predictions, but they're not really good at establishing cause and effect, which we as humans are really good at. We as human beings have a natural system in our heads that allows us to say the floor is wet because it rained versus the floor is wet because there were sprinklers.
So I found you right there, Donald. I'm going to stop and interrupt you there and say, so that measure of identifying those causal relationships, the limitation though is that we humans are the ones that are determining what the causal inferences are, and then we're saying that the algorithms or the AI have to match our level of identification of these inferences. What if, and this happens all the time in machine learning, I'm surprised you didn't have this as one of your views, is that we find patterns in the data which may not exist or may support a counterpoint to what we would like to believe. So, right, like if we look at all the data, humans might be seen as, this infection on the planet, right?
Yeah.
And by many views, right, like the AI would say, look, they're a parasite.
Right.
But will we then say like, oh, we don't accept that causal relationship that you've come up with?
Right. Yeah. No. I think. No. Listen. That's what I'm saying. Like I think AI, and clearly the advantage is that it finds things that humans don't, which is why the machine is able to detect the tumor better than not because it's establishing some kind of causal framework to do it. It's just making sense of this image in a completely different way. Yeah. Right, but there is no causal relationship at all in detecting it's all a scan. There's not. I mean, you're not saying, hey, did this You're not asking the robot to say, hey, what caused the tumor? You're just asking the robot to say, does this patient have a tumor or not? So yes, like in that sense, like it definitely finds hidden things that you're right. I think that we as human beings do not have the right framework to make sense of that finds it, and so we need to leverage that. What I'm saying is like. I think AI can even do even more other than that. It's already done that. If it then goes back to incorporate to give answers to other things that we want.
Let me jump in there because that goes into what I was going to add, which was what analytics and data science and AI have all been able to do is been able to, number one, remove biases that really is a part of our monkey-wired brain, right? That we look for patterns that aren't necessarily logical, and remove. I have so many different examples of how analytics and data science, AI has helped. For example, the medical field, where the rate of which doctors and nurses kill people is very high relative to when they aren't introduced to practices and protections, technology-based suggestions that help with monitoring and then reacting to how what may be happening in a particular medical room. And I remember was a book I read, unfortunately, I don't recall, it was ages ago. And at the time I was dating a nurse, and she was so against, eggheads coming into her field and telling her how to do things, right? But I'm like, have you not, but read the research, like read how it's saving lives, because of the fact that, it's, a lot of these models, a lot of these, inputs are being taken and finding murmurs in people's hearts, and finding, just finding how certain behaviors are contributing to, and ultimately reducing malpractice, right? Ultimately, because once you see it, you transfer and you change your behavior. You look at basketball, right? I'm not sure how many basketball fans are watching right now, but the way quants, Moneyball, right? If anyone's watched that, right, or read the book, right? How you had a whole industry of professional scouts and whatnot who had particular ways. Oh, look at the way the guy walked. He's gonna be a superstar. And you see the way he chews that gum. That's a superstar right there. That's how they would evaluate people, by these things that really had no real relation to how the person performed. Now, what these quants in that field did was, they would look at the behavior of professionals at the collegiate level, and because they had data to analyze, they were taking 4th, 5th round pick people, right, low round ranked folks, and those folks were performing extraordinarily because the data was very clear, very unbiased, based on performance, right, that correlated with an output that was preferred, right, versus things that on exterior didn't matter. I'm gonna bring this home with poker. I like poker, and one aspect that is very hard for human beings to sort of rationalize, wrap their minds around, is the concept of you can lose right now, but if you're gonna play 10 times, it's okay to lose right now if you win the next 6 times, right? Because we're, as human beings, we're wired in a way, right, to say, you know what, if I go, back in the primal days, there's only one time, right? So if you walk into that water, you get stung by something, you're never going back in the water again. But we're still wired, especially when, like, say you're playing poker and you lose a hand. Oh man, I don't want to experience that negative thing ever again, ever in my rest of my life, right? Where that's a problem, because poker played well is a statistical game played over many rounds, and you want to always think about, out of 10 times, so long as I win 6 times out of those 10 times, it's an acceptable move to make, right? Or even 4 times, depending on the value, right? The value of what you're betting versus what you get back, right? And so all this comes into play, right? When you're talking about biases that were ingrained in, and what AI and what statistics and analytics can help you overcome, right? And our speaker is on point when he said, that there's certain things that AI does very well, right? So these certain very specific things that AI does well. And that's where I think the hope of, a lot of people tend to be very pessimistic, right? It's just that I think we're still very far away from a system that really is able to extrapolate the way human beings do on a wide variety of things. We'll build these things that are very siloed, that are exceptionally good, right, at these very simple tasks.
Yeah.
But I think for the next 100 years at least, we're probably overall okay from, being replaced wholesale. I can't speak for the next 100 years, but at least this 100 years, I think we're all right.
We have job security.
One thing I want to add in there, though, guys, as you're talking about this, about bias, is that machine learning models can get biased too, right? And they can be trained biasly. So have you guys heard of Data for Black Lives?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a whole movement of, I think she was a PhD student at MIT, and she was saying, she wants to abolish big data because of the predatory like loaning practices of some of these big banks
Yeah.
towards African Americans, because the models are, even though that they don't have any information to say race, they're coming up with bias for race because they're learning from historical examples.
Exactly.
So separate, I know there's separate movements in the data science community to talk about whatever these models are that we're talking about, we have to have appropriate training data, because if the data is biased in the past, it's going to be biased in the future.
Right.
And I'm not going to go too much into politics, but this is one big thing for me about police shootings in the US that we talk about, is that what is that like, people talk about, oh, well, the data shows there's equality, but I'm like, there could be bias in the reporting.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's
right, yeah.
talking about a biased system. If the system is designed in such a way, it's going to have biased data. And then if we build systems off of that, they're going to be biased systems or racist systems.
Of course, yeah. I mean, nothing replaces good data. I mean, listen, there's nothing, clearly there's going to be no statistics, AI, nothing's going to be able to solve the problem of like someone gave you the wrong data, manipulated the data. I mean, you can't, I mean, so yes, I mean, ultimately, like any kind of method that you use is inherently assuming that the data you have is clean, right, and is right, and accordingly right. But even other biases that are just not related to like how you code the data can creep in too. So yeah, I mean, so this is where like I think that's where like I totally agree with Chris. Like, very specific, and it has all these things, and in order for that to be like the vision that we all may have, it'd have to overcome this issue, which it'd be hard to do without humans. You need to have, like, I think human systems can tease out those right, like those systems of bias often. What's up?
This is why the three of us are always going to have a job.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, right? But so yeah, I mean, I think the AI story is really good, and I think from an international, like, global perspective, like, yeah, I think there is a lot of possibilities. So I think for countries and nations to be really invested in this makes sense, and to really think about how can because it's not just AI. I mean, really just invest in making sense, like building data like infrastructures, right? Sometimes you may use AI, sometimes you may not. Like, but it does make a lot of sense for people who who want to get an idea of what the future is going to look like, what the future kind of like decision making we're going to be kind of required to do, and how to integrate these systems like seamlessly. I think that's the hardest part, is like how to, and Morgan and I used to work together at this company, and like the biggest hurdle that this company had was that nothing was seamless. Like it had a lot of potential, but it was like the data was there and there was lots of things, but it wasn't a seamless thing that made everyone that needed use of that data for different reasons, their jobs actually were a lot harder. Like, I don't think those dashboards did that much, Morgan, but anyways.
I mean, I was never really a big fan of those dashboards. Now you got me to say it.
They were nice. Aesthetically, you made them really nice. I mean, and Keith and all those, people, but I don't think it did jack shit. But anyways, yeah.
No, I think that, yeah, I mean, this is the problem, I mean, especially when we talk about healthcare or like any other of these large complex systems, is that you can't change an individual item or just by giving people like this calculated aggregate data. You need to talk about processes. You need to talk about how is it that you're going to change behavior. And that's where, like, to me, economics training is sometimes way more valuable than just mathematics and statistics or computer science training, is because you have to be able to put that data that you've got into contextual perception. And that's why, Don and I go back and forth. I'm glad to have Chris on here as a fellow economist to back me up, because Don comes from this math statistics background. He's like, we're gonna have strong statistical models that you economists don't use regularly. Yeah, we might be in the dark ages on our math, but our math has been powering the global economy, for the last, 400 years or so, right? So that's why I'm still a big proponent for economics. Before we jump too far, I want to make sure that if there's anybody, any of the attendees that have a question, to please share it with us in the chat, and so I can raise it up to Adan and Chris. Want to make sure you guys are getting involved, and if you guys have any ideas about the future of tech, anything related to the future of work after AI or with AI, um, please join us, because we want to make this as engaging of a conversation, because I think the three of us are sitting here just talking, thinking
Oh, we
about
could talk. Yeah.
I'm in the void right now. I'm actually in Chris's background right now.
Yeah, I mean, Morgan and I have spent countless hours arguing. We can talk. We can talk all the time. I mean, one thing that I think is interesting right now is like how like the level of uncertainty and during the pandemic, I think makes people realize how hard it is to do really good work in this niche. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like I'm an academic, but there's a lot of bad academics out there. And systems, not just individuals. Like to me, like I don't like. Yes, there's a small group of people who are out there to like manipulate data and who like fucking do like evil shit. Don't get me wrong. But like I can't do anything about those people. The issue is like the unconscious things, like the p-value hacking. The normal researcher who doesn't know, like they're not trying to manipulate anything. It's just that's like what they're incentivized to do, and that those downstream effects. And like it's happened to me. Like it's a growing process. Like you're not going to be the best, analyst the first time, right? You kind of have to learn it. But, the way it's taught, I think, is very, I think, outdated. And I think it's showing right now with how much misinformation there is. Like who do you really trust? Who do you really believe? Like, how much do we really believe this one clinical trial that showed, listen, the remdesivir trial, I'm not sure how much you've all been following COVID, but like this one drug, there's been over 1,000 different drugs that have been tested for COVID, okay? And most people who know a little bit about like virology or like the essence of these viruses knew that like it'd be very hard to find a knockout drug. The only thing we're gonna have is a vaccine. And like we all knew that like, yes, we can invest as much money, we can try zinc, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, I can name 1,000 different others that have failed, right? But yeah, you still have these studies like 20 patients, and it shows that like the remdesivir is like the most promising one because it's like does show potential effect, but it's not going to be a knockout. It's like it might say like the time to recovery. They measured time to recovery between people who got the drug and didn't, and they saw that people who got the drug like recovered in a day and a half. So like yeah, but they were as likely to die. So like okay, yeah, you can give the drug, but it's not going to be a knockout drug. And like, this is just one study. Like, it'd be nice to have 5-10 studies that sort of, whatever. So it's really relevant because, to be honest, a lot of things that we do, especially in healthcare, a lot of things that we do has no basis for why we do it. And so that's where people like us can bring our creativity, I think, to say like, whoa, something's off there. Or like, I want to look at this question a little bit different way or whatever.
I think there's value to, even those folks who aren't even going to do this professionally, to be able to think in a data-centric way, right?
I agree.
I implore a firefighter, a police officer, a cook. I mean, anything that you wouldn't naturally think that data would be of value to honestly take a junior level data course, just to understand some of the more implicit ways and the ways you think. I mean, one of the reasons why I even got into economics in the first place was because even though I was more, actually looking back, I probably should have went towards, computer programming or pure science. But I took that first economics course, and when you understood, I understood very quickly, that this is the psychology of how people react with money, and resources, right? Both at the micro, and then there's another nuance of how interaction plays out at the micro level and how the interaction plays at the macro level, two very different ways. For example, the concept of voting. At an individual level, it's a massive waste of time, at the individual level. Your vote individually doesn't matter, doesn't change anything. But at the macro level, if many people think that way, that's a massive problem, right? And it's counterintuitive. A lot of macro is very counterintuitive in how that process works. And when I realized this complexity, and as someone who always was someone who, for example, I always played RPGs as a kid. I love that. I love strategy. I love thinking about stuff.
Kingdom Hearts.
Right? Yeah. Final Fantasy over here, right? Team Chocobo, right? And so when I realized that, and this is, I didn't even think about professionally what this could mean, but I can see myself in the next 4 years. Cool. But I can tell you, I've done a lot of things outside of data, right? I mean, I'm here in Haiti. I'm running a lot of different ventures here. Media company, staffing, outsourcing, blah, blah, blah. About to start export-based distribution soon. And I can tell you, I've been successful in every single thing I've touched because of the fact of, I look at it very analytically. I try to remove bias in how I feel about something. And I structure things and what's the data telling me, right? And I do a lot of informal surveys. I do quote unquote A and B testing. I do a lot of stuff to allow information technologically to drive my action, right? And so if it's worked for me, I know it can work for anyone, right? And so, I mean, that's what I really want to add. I just want to add that aspect, that it's helpful for everyone and anyone, no matter what.
I totally agree. Not just because I'm a data geek, but I just think that we as humans naturally do this already, and it makes sense to our everyday lives, and certainly is worth it. And lots of opportunities for sure.
Right. So I think this is a great segue for me to lead into one of the questions that I prepared for this, was that if there was one thing that you guys could do to change the world, to get people more interested in using and applying data to decision making, what would it be? What would that one thing be?
Damn, it's a tough one.
I don't have an answer to this. That's why I'm asking it for you guys.
One thing that I could say that again. So one thing I could do.
Yeah, one thing that you would change in the world. Like, let's say you had this omnipresent power that, you are Donald Trump. You can just say something and people are going to react. Potentially, you can move things around in the world.
Let me try to take this. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. One thing I can say, when you look at a lot of some of the more stronger, like Sweden and a lot of these, better functioning Eastern European countries, they're very data based, and they allow professionals. There's a very close relationship with professional data scientists, statisticians, quantifiers, mathematicians, scientists. Okay. And so if I could change the world myself, I would, because you can't force anything on, especially Americans, can't force anything on. But I would want there to be a natural desire and appreciation for what professionals can bring to removing the inherent biases that exist within us. That's a difficult ask, because particularly Morgan, the better question is, who are we talking about? Are we talking about Americans? Or are we talking about other people, right? Because Americans, Americans like pigs in slop. Like we revel in our biases. We don't. So
addressing bias around the world is a huge thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. The unknown.
Right.
I think I've met people in Port-au-Prince who are scared to leave the capital.
Right.
Because they don't know
the way I was very similar along the same lines. Really, I think if I could, is to have a focus on using it for good, because anything that can be used for good can be used for bad. And data can be used, and it has been and is used for very poor reasons and for very sometimes manipulative reasons. And so I guess to really put the focus on trying to actually use it for improving people's lives and providing solutions and answers to questions that we all care about. And so, to really have that focus, because trust me, there's companies where data science companies who are just really good companies, right? And I don't necessarily want to promote that message, right? Or historically, just other companies that have used just data for bad reasons. So I'd say I think certainly make these careers and possibilities more accessible. And also have a focus on, there's a data science for good movement, right? So think that would be something, yeah.
So, okay, now I'm going to go slightly away from the data science for good aspect and talk more about, so, one aspect of this whole series and these conversations that we want to talk about, how can we apply these analytics and these emerging technologies in the global South? So I wonder if you guys would think, what's the greatest potential application of data science that can be applied in the developing world and in the global South in general? So thinking about in the context of Haiti, maybe we'll talk about our neighbors in the DR. What, but Adan, I know your family is of Mexican descent. What kinds of applications could we look to? What areas should we be focusing on, or should entrepreneurs be focusing on to be applying these skills? Because I'm sure there's people who want to join, who want to start learning data science, but then they're like, well, the only people I know who are using data science are Google, Instagram, and they're in North America, right? Or
Right.
they're in Western Europe, or maybe they're in China. Again,
Right.
so these are in much larger, bigger economies that have huge barriers before you can even have the opportunity to apply. So what areas do you guys think would be fruitful for people in the global South to pursue as they're getting?
I think it has to be very contextual to the country and the nation, right? I think I think the emerging technologies, and to be honest, let's think about technologies that have done really well. Usually a technology that's blown up is something really simple, but important to someone. There's a lot of fancy ideas, a lot of companies that they just don't work, right? Versus sometimes you see these companies, it's just a very simple tool, right? So I think technologies that really improve day-to-day functioning, that really bring us can allow us to open up time windows in our lives to do the things that we really want to do, right? So that could be whatever, once again, it would depend on each country, but yeah, I think solving just what are the major barriers to an impoverished person in those different covers, what is something that they could do that would be simple that we could do to help them, whatever it is, the simple solution that they need, right? So day-to-day, I think emerging technologies and day-to-day life functioning, I think something.
For me, that's a question I wrestle with, because here in Haiti, you see this burgeoning movement. You have these places like Impact Hub, Alpha, what is that? Alpha Hub or something, Bunch, right? You have these places that are looking towards the future. But the problem is that their market is Haiti, and Haiti is very much this market is not the future, right? You have the big business players. They're very much comfortable, because once you have enough market share and maturity in this market, you don't need to innovate, and that money's as guaranteed as something very guaranteed. Is that my imagination fails me? That's how guaranteed it is, right? And there's no desire, there's no need for innovation, because competitors aren't coming into the market. It's too difficult to get in here, right? Between regulation, between difficulties of registration, corruption, and just the general business environment. Once you're established, that's it. Right? So there's no desire, there's no need. It's a waste of resources to innovate, and that has technology. And then you have the people. God bless them. I'm sure they a lot of Haitians would love to move forward with because they understand a lot of Haitians actually are very cognizant of what's going on in the world, because they have family and friends that are in America or in Chile or in Dominican Republic or in Brazil, or because Haitians are one of the number one brain drained society in the world. Above, I think Venezuela might be very close by now, but still Haiti was there, and Iraq, war zones, you name it. Haiti's number one in terms of the amount of its people who has left its shores. So every single person here in this country, they have a close cousin, or even closer than that, who's left. And so they're in contact, they're seeing stuff on their WhatsApp, on their Facebook, blah, 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 how they're living. So it's not that they wouldn't want to engage with digital currency or Bitcoin or something. It's just that they don't have electricity. Literally, today as I'm talking to you, I'm on day 21 without electricity. I'm fine. I'm talking to you because I've spent a lot of money to get 8 solar panels on my roof, connected to 12 batteries, and I still have 2 backup generators just in case, God forbid something happens, right? So and on top of that, I have 2, not 1, 2 lines of fiber, because at any point, one of my fiber lines will go down. So I have to have my second, otherwise, I'm disconnected from the world. That's a lot of money. A lot of money 95% of Haitians don't have access to, okay? And so when you add all these factors together, it makes me, I'm always hard pressed to really appreciate what the value of technology, as your question implies, Morgan, what that can really, and that even our specialized field, what can that really do, right? How can that really impact? Now, the solution for me in that, because I'm never someone to provide a problem and not provide a solution, is that if you can prepare these same, there is, this, because usually we're talking about this pool of very savvy locals. We're talking about Mexicans or wherever, right? Haitians. There is a pool, and Bunge has shown this. Impact Hub has shown this. They're full. They don't have places to sit. There's so many Haitians in there with laptops trying to work, trying to get a better life using 2020, technology, tools, right? So they're there, but the ones who are most successful gear towards the outside, more developed world and plug into it. I have an associate of mine who saw what I was doing in the outsourcing individual, and it just got his brain working. Until I came around to what I'm doing, that I thought never came to his mind. He was a serial student, went to school, he got his bachelor's, got equivalent of master's, was just wrapped up law school, and he was probably going to grab another degree because, what else can I do? You can't get work here, right? Just keep on going to school until you land something. But then, seeing what I'm doing, he became a freelancer, professional freelancer, using Upwork, using Fiverr, using freelancer.com. And now this guy is making $1,000 a month. He has 2 laptops. He has 2 gigs that are paying him. One's paying him $500, $600, others paying him $400 or so. 2 gigs, 2 laptops, ship it away, doing sort of IT help desk, sort of customer data entry. So these are the typical things you can do gig-wise. But when I say $1,000, it may be lost if you don't live in this country. Professionals, high-ranking professionals at NGOs don't make $1,000 or will make $1,000. I mean, but you have to be in it for years, 10, 20 years, constantly working to get to that point where you're making. This guy is 26, 25, right? And he's making that much. And I'm seeing firsthand, he's helping his sisters go through school, pay for their graduations, right? I'm seeing the impact of how he's helping to change his family, his parents, and himself. He has a little girlfriend. He's buying a little inverter battery packs for his girl. He's stepping up as a man, as a provider, right? And so I say all this to wrap it up, to say structuring this know-how, that, as I mentioned, I'm building things up, I'm scaffolding up, you see? Once you build the know-how and you impose somebody, okay, data, IT, you can look at the world differently, remove biases, right? And then you can take that next step and say, okay, what can I do given the reality of the situation that I'm in? And I can plug into this larger world ecosystem, that of professionalism and data, right? That's how you win. Because I can tell you, I'm very pessimistic of this domestic economy. That's why everything I build is outward facing. My staffing, my outsourcing, my export distribution company, they're outward facing because that's where the money is. That's where the opportunity is. It's not internally in this country, it's externally, right? And I think data as becoming data professionals puts you uniquely in that realm because again, the skill sets you're learning, the way you think, it's very compatible with where the modern world that we are in today.
No, that's great. Great, Chris. I honestly have like 10 more things I could follow up just on what you just said, but we need to wrap it up now for an hour. So again, I want to thank you, Chris. Thank you, Don, for joining me. I think this is a lot of fun, but I want to do this again and again because there's so many more questions that we need to answer. There's so many more topics that we need to try to address and try to think about different opportunities for the Global South with these technologies. So that said, hope everybody enjoyed this webinar today. check out Chris Genti. He's got a YouTube page as well. He's got his own stuff going on.
I'll drop it in there. YouTube, C Genti, SEE, like C. You're gonna see me, C